Welcome to Behind the Headlines, the weekly news roundup from Utah Public Radio and the Salt Lake Tribune. I'm Tom Williams. A few massive changes Utah could see from the 2025 legislative session. No better than working at 7-Eleven. Unions oppose a bill to end collective bargaining for Utah public employees. And President Trump tells immigration officials to make arrests in schools. Here's what Utah students and families need to know. Those are some of the headlines we'll be talking about. Later in the program, we'll be talking with Salt Lake Tribune education reporter Carmen Nesbitt. Right now we bring in Salt Lake Tribune politics reporter Robert Gehrke. Robert, thanks for joining us.
Yeah, Tom, sorry, I was muted. Happy to be here.
Good to have you with us. So let's jump into the legislature. Of course, the session opened on Tuesday, and we will start with election law. Republicans are looking to make a series of changes in how elections are run. So what are some of the highlights there, Robert?
Yeah, I mean, there were two audits, as you recall. We spoke about them previously on the show. Looking at the way that signatures are verified and also the way that the ballots are verified based on the signatures, and some of the legislators were a little concerned about that, and there was also concerns about Phil Lyman was raising these concerns about alleging election fraud and things like that. Basically, there's some heartburn over the vote by mail system and whether it's secure or not. The Speaker of the House asked after the last audit came out if it's as secure as voting in person. He didn't think it was, and so that sort of sparked this movement in some circles, some parts of the party to get rid of vote by mail. The vote by mail, as we've talked about, has had a big effect on voter turnout. Utah used to be near the bottom of states in terms of voter turnout, and after it adopted vote by mail in 2014, moved way up. So there's some potential ramifications for it, but that's one of the bills that came out this week. It was Representative Jefferson Burton's bill. It came out that said people would have to opt in to vote by mail, basically fill out a form, explain maybe why they can't vote in person, and then they could get a mail-in ballot. His bill would also require people to put them in drop boxes. Those mail-in ballots are also voted in person in a polling place. So, major changes to the system. There are other bills that would also, have turn vote by mail into, an opt-in thing, so it's not universal. The Senate seems to be a little bit cool on that idea, though. Yesterday, Senator Mike McKell, who's in leadership, told me that the Senate's going to have an alternative plan. They've seen polling that says that 80% of Utahns like the vote by mail system, and part of the popularity for that, frankly, is that people like to be able to sit down and do some research when they're filling out their ballot, especially on the down ballot races that maybe didn't get as much attention, aren't as high profile, judges, school boards, things like that. And so he thinks that there's strong public support for vote by mail, but so they're not there's and he said there's strong support in the caucus for keeping it. But Senate President Stuart Adams said that there's support for vote by mail, but there's also support for making sure that the elections are secure and there's not fraud. So they're trying to find ways that they can bolster both, perhaps through a voter ID provision in some way. You have to put your ID number on the ballot, something like that, just as secondary verification, because they're not comfortable with the signatures. To be clear, the audit only found 5 examples where there were signature problems in the last 3 elections that they looked at. And so, this is we're not seeing rampant voter fraud. There just have been these isolated instances where, some of the ballots, basically some of the voter rolls were not maintained as carefully as they should have been. And so there have been these isolated cases where people have voted twice, for example, and received 2 ballots, and they want to make sure that doesn't happen again. So, it's still in flux. The bill, as I mentioned, Jefferson Burton's bill is still in the House, just came out this week, hasn't had a hearing yet, but we anticipate that one will start moving through the process soon.
There was an incident, of course, 2nd Congressional District primary That primary was decided by fewer than 200 votes. I don't know how many votes there were, but there were a number of votes didn't get counted because they were shipped off regular process to Las Vegas, didn't make it in time through the mail. Is there anything proposed to correct that?
Yeah, they're talking about moving up the mail-in deadline so they don't, because right now they just have to be postmarked by, excuse me, by election day. And so they're talking about moving up the deadline so they have to be received by election day and postmarked in advance, excuse me, of that. And so the thinking there is voters would have to be told that they could be delays in the mail and they're responsible for getting them in. The other part of that is that they anticipate that it would sort of speed up the vote counting, right? So we've got to wait a few days now for some of these late arriving votes to be counted, and they think that if they move up the deadline for getting those ballots back to the clerks, then that will accelerate the results. So that's something they're looking at. To be clear, the Colby Jenkins race, there's a significant question, I guess I should say, about whether or not those ballots were late because they were shipped to Vegas. Most of that district did not go through Vegas. Most of them were, and there was also the option for those voters, if they were so inclined, if they were concerned about them getting there late, that they could drop them in a drop box. But still, the governor has said that he thinks that having to wait days for election results to come in undermines confidence in the outcomes, and so he is supportive of the notion of moving up the deadline to return ballots. So that's probably something that we'll see this session.
Republican parties, there's a big split. Some of them think we should only have caucus convention, right? There's a whole big history behind why we have the signature route to get on the ballot. Representative Ward wants to lower that signature threshold. I guess it could be kind of expensive to go out and get those signatures. Is there anything on the reverse, increasing that threshold? Anything else on the signatures?
Yeah, I mean, there are some quarters of the Republican Party that want to get rid of the signature path. They think the party should be able to choose its candidates and not have to worry about other candidates coming in via the signature path. As you mentioned, Representative Ward wants to significantly lower the signature thresholds. Utah has the highest signature barriers in the country. So the 28,000 that you need to get for a statewide race, or 7,000 for a congressional race, those are the highest in the country. And he thinks it does put a financial burden on candidates who, when really in his mind, the point of signature gathering is just to sort of, weed out the people who might be fringe candidates or not have any public support or organization skills. And so he wants to make it more of a token showing of some support. And that would make it much less expensive, obviously, for candidates to qualify. And also, probably you would see more candidates going that path. He had that there's probably not a lot of support among his Republican colleagues necessarily for that. So that one's got an uphill battle. I also think that any efforts to try to get rid of the signature path might face challenges as well, because polling has showed that the public is supportive of that signature path. And particularly after the last election, when we had candidates who won the primaries, Governor Cox, John Curtis, Derek Brown, all took the signature path rather than the convention path. I think that there's, a pretty clear case to be made that the signature path is more reflective. The candidates who emerge through the signature path are more reflective of the mainstream Republican voters.
I want to turn to the legislature versus the judiciary. I think that versus is applicable right now. You did a story reporting on the Chief Justice giving the state of the judiciary to the legislature. You reported that Republican legislators, by and large, were pretty cool to his remarks. Remind us why there's one legislator used the word consternation in a quote to you.
Right. Right. So the judiciary over the last several years, 2 years at least, has sort of been an obstacle to some of the things that the Republicans in the legislature have been trying to get done, and it goes back to the judges that blocked the state's abortion ban. Judges blocked the legislature's transgender sports ban that was passed a few years ago. But more recently, there have been even higher profile instances, with the judges saying that or with the Supreme Court saying that the legislature can't undo ballot initiatives that are passed by citizens. That these in particular, it was the gerrymandering initiative. They said if the legislature can just undo a citizen passed initiative, then the citizen passed initiative that's in the Constitution, the right to that, becomes kind of meaningless. And so they blocked the legislature from undoing those. They blocked the legislature from undoing or overturning that opinion with the constitutional amendment that they tried to put on the ballot in November. Said that the language on that was misleading and that they failed to comply with the publication rule that was in the Constitution. So there's just this frustration that the judges have been this obstacle to some of the things that legislative leadership in particular want to get done. And so there's an effort to try to reform it, and that ranges anywhere from, some states have elected judges, either partisan or nonpartisan elections. There's talk of term limits for judges or age limits. There's some discussion about when they go to a retention election. Initially, the talk was that the legislature would have to approve the judges before they go on the ballot for retention. There's pretty wide belief that would be unconstitutional. So now the talk is, well, maybe the legislature provides voters with information about judges that they think are not doing a good job and should not be retained. So it would just be in addition to those Judicial Performance Evaluation Commission ratings that judges get. And so, all of this is kind of, lurking in the background right now. We haven't seen any bills on these. But the Chief Justice, he gives his annual State of the Judiciary speech, and usually it's kind of a ho-hum, boring speech about, we've handled this many cases and yada yada. He took this head on and kind of said, you're going to disagree with us from time to time on the opinions that we issue, but we're a separate branch of government and we need that independence. And we need to agree to disagree on these cases where we might, go against your wishes. And that if we don't have that sort of independence, it undermines the public's faith in the system, in the institution. And so he urged them, if they are going to make some changes, to think about the overall impact. I should note that Utah's system for nominating and retaining judges has been, called sort of the gold standard for judicial systems across the country. And so he cautioned them against doing anything that might undermine that going forward. And as you mentioned, Senator Cullimore, I talked to him after the speech. He says, he agrees that they're a separate institution, but he is concerned that, while legislators have to be accountable to their constituents, he thinks judges don't have the same level of accountability as legislators do. And these changes that they're discussing, in his mind, would just increase that level of accountability for the judges.
Well, let's take a break. We'll come back with Robert Gehrke. Right now, you're listening to Behind the Headlines, the weekly news roundup from Utah Public Radio and the Salt Lake Tribune. We're talking with Salt Lake Tribune politics reporter Robert Gehrke. When we come back, we'll talk more about the legislature, talk about housing and homelessness, and a few other issues as the legislature is kicked off this week. More following this break. You're listening to Behind the Headlines, the weekly news roundup from Utah Public Radio and the Salt Lake Tribune. I'm Tom Williams. This part of the program, I'm talking with Salt Lake Tribune politics reporter Robert Gehrke. We're looking at some bills that will be coming up this legislative session, which kicked off on Tuesday. So, Robert, we talked about Representative Ward. Representative Ward is a Republican from Bountiful. He has a proposal regarding housing. Maybe that's a good starting point for housing.
Yeah, I mean, the housing. My colleague Megan Van has been doing most of the coverage on the housing front, but it is a major issue this session. You know, the governor has put forward this goal of having 35,000 starter homes by 2030, which is a huge obstacle when you look at how much housing is being built currently. And the biggest part of this is that there's these they believe that there are these obstacles at the city level. I mean, a lot of it comes down to the local zoning issues and so forth. And so they're trying to work with the League of Cities and Towns to ease some of the zoning restrictions that might be in place. And there are a number of bills, ranging from Representative Ward's bill to a bill that Tyler Clancy's sponsoring that would, basically say that corporations can't own housing because they think that drains some of the housing stock that's available. Excuse me. And so there's lots of discussion around housing. The governor, to be clear, thinks that a lot of the stuff that they've talked about so far has not taken effect. Bills that passed last session, for example, that just kicked in July, and so he thinks there's going to be some things that kind of that spur some of this along. But housing is going to be just a major issue this session for sure.
What about homelessness? I know that Speaker Schultz, President Adams, and others are demanding that the city restore public safety. I guess concerns about law enforcement around these shelters.
Yeah, particularly this is consternation that they have. I mean, there's that word again, I guess. Mm-hmm. This is the consternation that they've got about the way that Salt Lake City is enforcing homelessness issues. And so they wanted to see a plan from the mayor, who delivered that plan about how she's going to, how the city plans to tackle homelessness. And I think her message was largely that this needs to be a partnership. This is a statewide issue. It needs statewide resources and cooperation, which we've heard before. So the question right now is, does the state take a hands-off approach? Does the state provide resources to the city to enforce homelessness laws? Because as I think we talked about on this show before, there was a Utah Supreme Court ruling that said that camping in public places is no longer a constitutionally protected act function. And so they want to see more enforcement of this. And it boils down to that they don't like the fact that people coming to the city or living in the city see these homeless encampments that are, in parks and along streets. And so this is sort of the tension that they've got. And are they going to be a active partner, or are they going to be sort of the boss, I guess, in telling the city how they need to go about addressing this?
Well, make sure we talk about energy. Some interesting proposals. Governor Cox and President Adams are both touting nuclear energy as part of an energy package. President Adams is talking about micro reactors. Tell me about some of the proposals under nuclear energy.
Yeah, Utah's been kind of interesting when it comes to nuclear power because we've never had a commercial reactor. And we've got this history with nuclear power that, goes back to the downwinders and the nuclear testing that was done in Nevada and the people who were sickened by the fallout from that. There's always been sort of this suspicion or unease with nuclear in this state. Right now, both Governor Cox and particularly President Adams are bullish on these small modular reactors or micro reactors. that they basically kind of what they use on submarines, and they think that if you get, as President Adams said, if you get a series of these and kind of link them together, you can meet some of the power needs. And he says that a lot of what is driving this, frankly, is that AI, artificial intelligence, is taking so much computing power, it takes so much energy that he says that if Utah wants to be a leader, if the United States wants to be a leader, we're going to have to significantly increase our energy output. Governor Cox has set the goal of doubling our energy output within 5 years. I'm sorry, 10 years, I believe. And President Adams wants to triple it by 2050. So, these are ambitious goals, but they say that if Utah wants to be out in front on the artificial intelligence revolution, this is what's needed. So the nuclear power is sort of unproven right now. Even these small modular reactors, the regulatory hurdles are high, the cost is high. There's a project up in Wyoming that they're trying to get off the ground. It's got Bill Gates backing it, but they think that with the Trump administration coming in particular and his promise to streamline regulatory processes, they think that Utah can be a player in this field. And then beyond that, there's the governor wants money for some geothermal energy development. There's still coal, natural gas that are on the table, and renewables as well. Although renewables maybe aren't getting quite the same level of love as they've gotten in the past. It is the direction. It is the only form of energy, frankly. I think. Well, fossil fuels have declined, but renewable energy has increased in the state over the last decade. So, that's going to be part of the portfolio as well.
Just a couple of minutes, and then we'll do a brief underplayed stories of the week. But Robert, I definitely wanted to get to this. Just published this morning. Utah wants to be a hub for space travel. Give me your minute version of this. It's pretty interesting.
Yeah. So back in the 70s, even when NASA was trying to get the space shuttle program off the ground, so to speak, Utah wanted to be a spaceport, a landing site or a launch site for the space shuttle program. That's kind of getting revived again now. Senator Jerry Stevenson is wants to create this committee, spend $1 million to not explore space, but explore Utah again being a hub for space launches and landings. He thinks that because Utah has these large open spaces, has the test and training range, has these military sites, and the aerospace industry, particularly in northern Utah, that it could be a big boon to the state if we could land. And he's sort of agnostic, I guess, on whether this would be a private endeavor like SpaceX, or if it's going to be partnering with NASA or the Air Force or Space Force. He hasn't made those decisions yet. That's what the committee's job is going to be. They just want to look at what's it going to cost, what would the benefits be, what are the obstacles, how can we address that and make Utah a player in this. So it is kind of interesting, and we'll see how it goes. This is not something that's going to happen next year or in 5 years. This is a long-term project, but he thinks there's just going to be enough interest and enough space launches and enough money around the space industry that it's something where Utah can be a player. Actually, one of the things I thought was interesting when I was researching this is one of the biggest selling points for Utah, frankly, is that it's at a higher elevation. And if you think about it, if you're launching from sea level, you've got to push up 4,000 feet through the atmosphere, through a thicker atmosphere. Whereas if you launch at 4,000 feet, you've already got that head start. And so you need less thrust and you can carry more payload and so forth. So, that was a big selling point in the 70s, and it will be again, I'm sure.
Yeah, it's interesting. I wouldn't have thought of that either. Yeah. So, Robert, here at the end, do you have an underplayed story of the week to share?
Yeah, I'm going to highlight one that Shannon Sollitt did. It came out yesterday. It's about the state has, after all of this opioid litigation with all the states, the Sackler family and Purdue Pharma have agreed in principle, at least, to pay the state, I believe it was $57 million for the harms that were done to Utahns. And this is the latest settlement in one of these lawsuits. The court still has to approve it, but the attorney general said if the court does approve it, and anticipates they will, that the state will be joining it, which means additional money coming to the state to sort of mitigate some of the damages that were done by the opioid pandemic over the years. And most of this was half of this would stay with the state, half of it would go to the impacted counties. That perhaps unfortunately, it doesn't really get down to the people who were directly harmed by it, but it's just to mitigate the expenses of the state as a result of those and that epidemic.
All right, check that story out and all the stories we're talking about this hour on sltrib.com. It's sltrib.com. We've been talking on Behind the Headlines with Salt Lake Tribune politics reporter Robert Gehrke. Robert, thanks so much. Appreciate it.
Yeah, thanks, Tom. Talk to you soon.
Talk to you soon. And following a break, Behind the Headlines will continue, and we'll be talking about these headlines. No better than working at 7-Eleven. Unions oppose a bill to end collective bargaining for Utah public employees. And President Trump tells immigration officials to make arrests in schools. Here's what Utah students and families need to know. We'll be talking with Salt Lake Tribune education reporter Carmen Nesbitt. You are listening to Behind the Headlines, the weekly news roundup from Utah Public Radio and the Salt Lake Tribune. More following this. You're listening to Behind the Headlines, the weekly news roundup from Utah Public Radio and the Salt Lake Tribune. I'm Tom Williams. On this part of the program, we'll be talking with Salt Lake Tribune education reporter Carmen Nesbitt. Carmen, thanks so much for joining us.
Thanks for having me.
So we want to talk about at least a couple of headlines. Probably we'll get to 4 stories here. The 2 headlines kind of at the top. Unions oppose a bill to end collective bargaining for Utah public employees. And President Trump tells immigration officials to make arrests in schools. Here's what Utah's students and families need to know. Well, let's start with the union bill. At least it is directed at unions. So HB 267, what would this do?
So HB 267 essentially it prevents public employers, and that means any government-owned entity like, fire departments, law enforcement, public education, from recognizing bargaining units. And what this does, essentially is ban collective bargaining within the public sector.
So I guess according to the bill, something like a Utah Education Association could exist, could still advocate, but they would not be recognized as a bargaining agent.
That is correct. Yeah, it doesn't stop the formation of a union or from public employees, stop them from joining a union, but it does weaken the bargaining power of these agencies because they're essentially not recognized.
So this applies to the public sector, right? Because in the private sector, those unions employees are protected by the National Labor Relations Act, I believe.
That is correct. Yeah, this does apply specifically to public employees. Private sector wouldn't be affected because it is protected by federal law. And one of the people I spoke to, Brad Assay, president of the American Federation of Teachers, Utah, said that it's easier to pick off, was his word, I believe, the public sector unions because there isn't that federal protection there.
So it's the teachers unions that are kind of most speaking out, but this could have an effect on other public sector, right? Law enforcement, firefighters, transit drivers.
Correct. Yeah, absolutely. One of the arguments made, again, by Brad Assay was that because the the UEA, the Utah Education Association, has kind of gone head-to-head with lawmakers over the past year, especially over the voucher law, as well as Amendment A. There's a theory out there that this bill is directly targeting the UEA, and everybody else is kind of collateral damage.
So the bill's sponsor, what is he saying?
He's saying that this bill, that would be, the bill sponsor is Jordan. Oh, I'm going to say his name wrong.
Yeah, I always have trouble. Is it Tusher?
Tusher. Yeah. But, his argument isn't that this is silencing public workers. He says that this is actually going to open up the negotiation table to more voices, because kind of at this point in time, generally how these things work is you have basically one agency, one union represented. If you're not part of that union, Utah is a right to work state, meaning you don't have to join a union if a union exists at your place of employment. You're not compelled to join or pay dues. He's saying that when people feel left out, there's many voices that aren't being heard or represented in these unions that he said, especially with the UEA, has a monopoly. And he basically argues this brings more voices to the table and more individuals to the table instead of that one, entity. Yeah.
So I think UEA strongly disagrees that there's nothing to see here, right? They're saying if we or other unions can't be the collective bargaining agent, then essentially that does away with collective bargaining.
Yeah. The UEA especially is saying, this is going to affect students. Part of what we do, part of our advocacy is for students. And if our essentially power there is weakened or completely diminished, we can't properly advocate for students.
Yeah, go ahead.
Sorry, yeah. The other issue, too, is for all public sector unions, another prediction is that wages will lower. They'll become stagnant. The organizations, they won't be competitive. They won't attract new talent. There's a lot of at risk here.
The AFL-CIO president, he says that without union representation, teachers would just become at-will employees, no better than working at 7-Eleven is what he said.
Right. Yeah, that's exactly what he said. And he also added that they're at the will of the state, right? The mercy of the state, actually, was the exact quote.
So the people on that side are predicting if collective bargaining goes away, wages might decrease, working conditions worsen. They're predicting some bad outcomes. Exactly.
Yep. And again, just to quote Worthington again, they're at the mercy of the state.
Now, as you mentioned,
and their benefits as well at the mercy.
Right. As you mentioned, some of these officials are saying that this affects students, right? That teachers' working conditions are students' learning conditions.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, so things like, smaller classroom sizes or teacher prep hours, even competitive pay for janitorial staff, right? All of those things are negotiated in contracts for many districts across the state.
We're talking on this part of Behind the Headlines with Carmen Nesbitt, Salt Lake Tribune education reporter. Let's move to another of your stories. You've been busy this week. So the headline here, Trump tells immigration officials to make arrests in schools. Here's what Utah students and families need to know. So this is a change in policy, I think. There previously under the Biden administration, immigration authorities were, I guess, restricted. There were sensitive areas that they should not go in to make arrests and such. Now the Trump administration's reversing that. So sensitive areas, I guess, included healthcare facilities, schools, and I can't remember. Oh, churches, right? So
churches.
Yeah, churches as well. So your story focuses on the schools. I guess school districts are trying to get ready for this.
Yeah, that's correct. Unfortunately, there hasn't been any guidance released from the Utah State Board of Education. What I really would have loved to be able to answer in this article was, if ICE comes knocking on a school door, what do administrators do? Do they have to let them in? Can they refuse them? What is the process? And unfortunately, that's a big question mark right now. I know some school districts, like Canyons, which is mentioned in the article, are just going to follow standard procedure for any visitor at the school, right? Which is they have to check in at the front desk, they have to provide ID. If they are with law enforcement, if they have a subpoena, if they have a arrest warrant, those employees have to directly call the district's legal office to deal with all of that. And, beyond, okay, if an ICE agent is there to, round up kids, to put that horribly, then after that point, if legal looks at the documents and they're legitimate, what happens? Can they just enter classrooms? We don't know.
So this is school districts trying to issue guidance. The state has not weighed in, I believe.
Yeah, not yet.
Okay.
Not yet. School districts are looking for answers. They're sending out messages to families and to staff and instructing staff to reach out to families they know could be impacted by this. One really, really important message that districts are sending out is that they cannot disclose immigration status to federal authorities. That is firstly protected under that kind of information protected under the FERPA. And second, immigration status is not a data point or information collected when a student enrolls in school. It's not required. So it's information they don't have unless it's voluntarily disclosed.
One of the worries here is what if a parent is arrested by ICE? What happens to the child?
Yeah, I'm not sure what happens to the child in terms of the system, but I know that schools are preparing for those situations, and they are offering counseling services and other support services for their students if that were to happen.
You talked to an analyst with Voices for Utah Children. They said that one effect of this policy change would be kids too scared to go to school, parents too scared to send them to school.
Yeah, that is a worry. Her name is Syriac Alvarez, senior policy analyst for the nonprofit Voices for Utah Children, and she said she doesn't exactly know, right, what the impact will be, how kids and families will feel, but when these things do happen, there is an increase in fear. And so one of the outcomes could be, a rise in absenteeism among undocumented students, or maybe students who have birthright citizenship, but whose parents might be undocumented. And she hopes that won't be the case because these kids do have a right, federally, to a free and appropriate public education.
The Trump administration is talking about going after birthright citizenship, right? I think there was an executive order issued. Governor Cox is pointing out that the executive order probably won't cut it because birthright citizenship is in the Constitution. But anyway, that's out there, I guess, and that's part of a fear.
Yeah, it compiles on, for sure.
Yeah. Let's move to another of your stories, Carmen. I'd love to talk about schools in the Wasatch District. This is in Heber City. Beautiful Wasatch Valley, growing area, and I guess like some other areas in the state, a lot of non-English speaking families and therefore children coming into these schools.
Yeah. So this story came out today. It was written, though, before the immigration policy changed, so the timing was just, a little, I don't know, funny. But yeah, at this school at Timanagos Middle, basically they had seen an influx of newcomers, particularly from Spanish-speaking countries, and they were kind of struggling to deal with some mischief makers, as Principal James Judd said. And they decided, hey, why don't we have parents come in and reel in these kids? And they formed a Latino parent volunteer group, called them Madres and Papas Lideres. I'm so sorry. I probably pronounced that very wrong. But, these parents came in and started patrolling the hallways. And what ended up happening was they didn't have these kids hanging around, and they really stepped in line. Like, you really don't want to mess around when your mom's there, right? So the kids, behavior improved, but more importantly, I don't want to say more importantly, but perhaps a unintended outcome of this program was an increase in the percentage of students reaching English proficiency at the school. So since the program's launch in 2022, that proficiency rate increased from 8% to 25% by last school year, and that's more than double the statewide average. A lot of that can be attributed to what's called a golden ticket program that the parent volunteer group started, and they also fund. And this is an after-school program that encourages those kids to go to what they call consultation time with their teachers, and that's just time to catch up on homework, maybe retake tests, do anything to get their grades up. And if they attend that consultation time, they can go to the cafeteria afterwards. They can get a snack. They are entered into a raffle to win a prize. And the reason it's called Golden Ticket is because they are handed literal golden tickets by their teachers. It's just seen a dramatic rise in English proficiency among multilingual learners at the school.
And understand that this program was instituted by the parents.
It is, yeah. Everything is done on a volunteer basis. Even funding, these parents are donating their own money to this.
I'm not sure if this was the principal or someone else, but I was interested to learn. They said that we had to overcome stereotypes to reach out to the parents. We'd assume they'd be working several jobs, they'd be too busy. Some of them don't speak English, but they reached out and the parents got involved.
Yeah, that was a principal, or the Principal James Judd, and I actually want to read the quote because it's really good. He said, "We created this excuse, this mindset that Hispanic parents don't have time to volunteer in schools because they're working too much or because they don't speak the language. They don't need to speak English to volunteer. Now I have a group of parents who know how to access counselors and food services and school nurses." And I thought that was great. And he talks about, in meeting with him, he talked about his own kind of biases, right, and stereotypes with Hispanic parents or newcomer families. And he said that was a big growing moment for him.
Also interesting, in, I guess, many cases where the parents maybe don't speak English, but the kids do, then the kids were used as a liaison. Hey, take this message to your parents. But he said, no, we shouldn't do that. We should go directly to the parents. And this program has helped, I guess.
Yeah, it helps. It helps parents understand the American school system as well. Like, they weren't raised in the American school system. They don't know how it works. And when you're relying on your kid to tell you information, kids can tell parents whatever they want to tell them. So if you kind of cut out the child as the middleman and give parents information, then they know where to hold their kids accountable. They know where the services are. They know, like, how the kid is doing in school. So that was a really important piece of this program.
Just before we leave this story, I want to have you tell me about HB 42. This deals with the higher cost of educating a so-called English language learner, ELL. So to educate an English language learner, you point out in your story, costs $500 per student in an elementary more. In an elementary school, $1,200 more per student per year in a high school. So the legislature has allocated some funds to help?
Yeah, well, there's a bill currently going through.
Oh, I see. It's proposed.
The process. Yeah, there's a proposed bill, I'm going to say, going through the process to provide some emergency funding to schools that are experiencing those influx of newcomers and English language learners. And, I'm not sure where it is in the process right now, but, I'm not sure. The bill also doesn't specify how much extra schools could receive. But it does kind of cap that. It's called emergency funds at $5 million total per fiscal year, which the Utah State Board of Education would be charged with kind of doling out and determining how much the schools would receive of that, $5 million total.
Let's move to a fourth and final story here, Carmen. The headline here, West High principal resigns after being put on unexplained administrative leave. We're talking about West High principal Jared Wright, popular principal. So tell me about this. We don't know what the administrative leave was. Now he's resigned?
Yep, we still don't know. He was put on leave January 10th. The district launched a internal investigation into the matter. The district spokesperson, Yandri Chatwin, did say the police weren't involved. It wasn't a criminal, matter, but they can't talk about personnel issues. She said that every person in the situation deserves privacy and due process, and so that's why they're not commenting on the situation. However, students and staff were really confused, and rightfully so. And last week, students walked out in protest of Jared Wright being put on leave, and so then fast forward a couple of days, Wright has resigned, and he did put a little personal post on Facebook and said that he's resigning due to some, quote, pressing family obligations. And he encouraged the students and said, the world is and will be better because of you. And yeah, we don't know exactly what's going on or why, but he has left.
You point out that when Wright came in 2020, he was replacing a principal who was fired.
Yeah. Principal, what was his name?
Ford White, I'm reading, yeah.
Yes. Who was fired for driving to intoxicated students home, where district policy said, you should have called the police instead of driven them home. So,
in the meantime, there's money, I guess, coming in. It's gonna renovate West High along with Highland.
Yeah, that's right. Salt Lake City voters passed that $730 million bond to pretty much give West a complete renovation, and as well as Highland High. So we still have another year or so before construction begins, but gearing up for some changes.
All right, very good. That's a quick rundown of 4 of your stories, I guess, from this week. A busy week for Salt Lake Tribune education reporter Carmen Nesbitt. Carmen, thanks so much.
Thank you, Tom.
Thank you. And thanks, everybody, for listening to Behind the Headlines, the weekly news roundup from Utah Public Radio and the Salt Lake Tribune. I'm Tom Williams. Hope you'll join me next week.